Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, hello, my name is Caitlin Elliott, and I cover true crime cases on Tuesdays and Fridays, with my more vintage cases occurring on Fridays. If this is something that interests you, go ahead and hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, turn on that notification bell so that you never miss any of my videos. So in my last video, we actually talked about a case that happened back in the year 2000. So this was the murder of 5-year-old Logan Marr, and in today's case, this was a mystery that extends back to 550 years ago. It is the case of the missing princes. How have you guys heard about this story, about the missing princes? So, it is a wild one, guys. So, this case is often regarded as one of the biggest mysteries of England still to this day. This case occurs back in the year of 1483. So this is, I think, my oldest case that I've ever covered here on my channel. So England was fully ruled through a monarchy back then, which means it was through the fact that a king was there and there was a queen. So this was under the rule of King Edward IV. And King Edward IV was said to have been born on April 28th of the year 1442, and he passed away on April 9th of 1483. Back in those days, people often did die at an early age due to diseases that they thought were incurable, and there's stuff like, I believe they had there was tuberculosis, scarlet fever, all those things that we now have medications for, they did not have back then. So people would die over just common colds and over chicken pox. So King Edward's rule was said to have occurred during a very important war back then, and this was called the War of the Roses. The War of the Roses, I believe. And the Wars of the Roses were said to have been a series of wars that were fought over the 1400s for control over the empire. So these wars were just very serious, and it's said that after they ended, there was this huge involvement of the Tudor houses and the York houses, and they were finally united to create one brand new royal dynasty. Because of this brand new dynasty being created, this ultimately destroyed the rivalry between the Tudor families and the York families. So with the rule of King Edward IV, he took over the throne in the year of 1460, right after his father died, and not even a year later, Edward decided he was just going to invade England in March of 1461. I'm not sure about the date yet. So I'm not exactly sure why he decided to invade. Maybe it was to expand his kingdom, and that's kind of what Hitler did back then. He wanted to invade Poland to create a massive Germany. So it is possible that's what he was thinking at the time. So he did end up fleeing the country, and he ended up in Belgium and stayed there for 10 years until he decided to try to invade England again in March of 1471. I don't know why he thought that was a good idea to try the second time, but After this, he ended up taking the throne once again, and he ended up ruling for another 12 years until he died. After the king passed away, his minor son was said to have had to have taken the throne. So now we're going to be discussing Prince Edward V of England. Edward V was born on November 2nd of the year 1470 in Westminster Abbey. So Westminster Abbey is more commonly known as the Collegiate Church of St. Peter in Westminster, and it's a private and personal church exclusively used for people of the monarchy families, so basically for kings and queens and their type of royal families. So almost 2 years later, on August 17th of the year 1473, his younger brother named Richard would soon be born. Edward became the Prince of Wales in June of 1471 at the age of 7 months, which is crazy to think about because, he's becoming a prince of a country and he possibly didn't even know how to sit up at the time. So it was just really odd to me. So because Edward was a prince, he was raised alongside his brother with intense sophistication, and at the age of 10, he had a marriage arranged for him to a 4-year-old little girl named Anne of Brittany. Does anyone else think it's really weird that this 10-year-old dude, this 10-year-old kid, is being told he has to marry this girl who is Anne of Brittany, and she's 4 years old and possibly isn't even fully potty trained yet. Like, it just blows my mind. But unfortunately, that's what life was like back then. You had the arranged marriages from the time that someone was born. They had to get married to this person. And I remember reading this, the other Boleyn girl, and it was the sister. She was married at the age of 12, I believe. And that just blew my mind because the guy that married her was in his 30s. So weird. So Edward was said to have received the heartbreaking news at the age of 12 on April 9th of 1483 that his father had just suddenly passed away. It wasn't said exactly what killed him. It could have been a heart attack. He could have just been walking. His heart just stopped. Like I said, back then people died really young. So it was said that this meant that he was supposed to take the throne as king, and his brother Richard, who was only 9 years old, and according to customs back then, the eldest son was to become king, so Richard would not become king. It would be Edward because he was the oldest. However, on April 30th of 1483, goodness gracious, it was announced to the public that Henry V's precedent had actually shown up to the royal court, I guess that's what it's called. So when the council, they heard about this, they wanted to crown him as king instead of the princes, which was just a big outroar and all that stuff. So in the summer of 1483, a man named Richard III, who was the brother of the original Edward, the father, he took the throne to rule England after his brother's death. So he then banished his two young nephews, who were the princes Edward and Richard, to be placed into a tower so they could not become king. The two princes were then ultimately placed into the tower on the royal family's property, and then they were just locked away. And it said, after a while, the young princes were seen less and less and less until they just completely vanished into thin air. However, there were multiple reports about the young princes being seen playing within the tower, and this was said to have been rumored, though, but there was never any recorded, scenes of this. No one wrote this down because they did have paper back then. They had parchment paper. Nobody wrote this down. Nobody, paid attention to it. It was just, hearsay, brought down from generation to generation. So there was even an attempt to rescue both of the brothers from the tower, but it had failed and the boys were not recovered. Many historians do believe that both Richard and Edward were unfortunately murdered by someone back in the year of 1483. I'm going to be doing this whole video. I'm so sorry. 1483. So according to Parliament back then, it was stated that it was too late to try and rescue the brothers, which is really weird. What does that even mean? What does it mean by it's too late? They got these two kids that were missing, that were supposed to become king, and now they're just it's just too late to go and look for them. That's just, it's suspicious to me. So, eventually the Duke of Buckingham, he soon got involved with the disappearances of both of the princes, and it said that he officially said that he knew and believed that the brothers were officially deceased and the princes were no longer there. Other than their disappearances, there was really no solid evidence that their princes had even been murdered, just the fact that they had just vanished into thin air. However, despite all of this, there was even no real solid evidence or proof that a murder had actually even occurred. However, we're talking about hundreds of years later, in the year of 1934, so it's 500 years later, there was a tower on the property that was said to have been investigated by scientists to see if they could figure out this mystery about the missing princes. So as they're walking inside, they didn't think that they would find anything. They're just kind of looking around, trying to, find what they can find. And they ended up stumbling upon 4 unidentified skeletal remains, because it's 500 years later. There's not going to be flesh, it's just going to be bone. So what's really bizarre to me is that even though these bodies were discovered, even all these years later, there has never been any DNA testing or analysis done on these bodies. So the bodies were recovered, and they were presumed to be, two young kids, but this has never been proven again. So, why? Why haven't they done any DNA testing? What are they trying to hide from the public? What exactly happened to these princes? Somebody knows something, and something is being hidden. So back in the 1400s, there were several rumors that were being spread around the community as to what truly could have happened to the young princes. The Lord Chancellor of France, he publicly warned England about the princes, stating that how they could be just trouble to the area and the community because of the fact that they were really young and they were inexperienced. They had no idea what it was like to rule the country. They were just trouble, as basically what they said. So for France, they basically, they felt this way because their own king at the time, his name was King Charles VIII. He was announced as king when he was 10 years old, and he was 13 years old running the entire country of France. So they just realized that maybe they're too young and too immature to even become a leader, but again, I can't say anything about it. Some people even stated that the Uncle Richard had actually killed the boys, while others claimed that the Duke of Buckingham had the princes formally executed, but none of these rumors were ever officially confirmed to be true. So, however, there was a lot of historians that did a lot of research into this case. I mean, a lot, because you can only do research when it comes to this case because it happened so long ago that there's nobody alive that can say what happened. And there was a majority of historians that actually believed that Richard had killed both the princes. On July 17th of 1674, there was an official remodel of the Tower of London. So this was 200 years into the future of the year 1674. So this is like a long time. And this remodel was done by the king at the time of 1674. So while performing this remodel, the king and the workers, they were stunned to actually discover this bizarre wooden box that was said to have been buried underneath all of the dirt and the rubble. So, of course, nobody had been expecting to see this. They were just like, what the hell? Why is there a box there? Like, nobody knew that this box was there. So, the curious workers, I mean, trust me, I believe we would all be curious if we were digging up something and we found a box. We're like, ooh, what is this? So they decided to open it up, and inside of this box was two small skeletons hidden inside. And it was said that the princes, they were only 12 and 9 years old when they went missing, so it's quite possible these skeletal remains belong to the princes, and they were hidden in this box behind a walled up chamber, like it had been sealed off with a wall. So these bones that were discovered were said to have belonged to the missing princes themselves, and discovered among them were actually discarded pieces of rags and velvet. So velvet was said to be a very common piece of attire that royal families would wear to show off their wealth. The bodies were ultimately buried with a tombstone that actually listed them as the missing princes, even though back then, like I said, they didn't have any DNA, so they just had to assume that these were the missing princes. And it was said that they were buried here, and everyone mourned them, and tombstones were laid there as Prince Edward and Prince Richard, even though, like I said, it's never been fully confirmed these were them. Over the years, there were thousands and thousands and thousands of theories as to what possibly could have happened to the boys. So the most common theory about this is that they were both murdered by their Uncle Richard, who was Richard III. Most historians believe he was absolutely responsible for what happened to the boys, and especially since he ended up actually being on the throne after the brothers completely vanished, which is like, that's weird because your two nephews disappeared, and not long after they vanished, you take the throne. So, I mean, it's just weird. However, it's also quite possible that this Uncle Richard had been the one behind the disappearances, like I said, to get to the throne. And see, like, the thing about this was that the brothers, they were next in line to the throne. So if their father would have passed away, One of the boys would have been next. But with eliminating the competition, the next person that would have been in line would have been the Uncle Richard. So if he could get rid of the boys, he would have no competition to get to the throne. He could easily get there, and he would just rule the way that he wanted to. Because, I mean, honestly, he just wanted power at this point. There were also rumors spreading around that the princes were dead, and Uncle Richard never even attempted to prove to society that this was wrong and that the princes were still alive. Which is really super suspicious behavior of him, because if, that was my family and someone was saying, like, my nephews disappeared or something and they were presumed to be dead, I would be like, oh my god, no, they're not, let me just go and look for them. He's like, alright, cool. It's so weird to me. And he also refused to open up an investigation onto what could have possibly happened to the brothers. He just said no, which is just flat out weird to me, because he should have been trying to do everything he possibly could to help and find his nephews, but it just seemed like it was suspicious to me that he wouldn't want anything to happen to, like, wouldn't want anyone to open up this investigation, figure out what happened to them. And, it's weird if he wasn't involved in it. Like, I don't know. However, it was said that Richard was away from the courts and this happened around the time the princes went missing, and if this was the case, he couldn't have possibly made them, vanish, because he wasn't there. He wasn't there to do it. So, however, the guards that were controlling the Tower of London, and his guards were controlling the Tower of London, and Richard could have easily sent his men out there to capture the boys and kill them. So even if this could have happened, it's unlikely this would have happened without the Uncle Richard's knowledge. He had to have known about it in order for it to have happened. So it's just weird to me. So 2 men named Moore and Polydore Virgil, they blamed the deaths of the boys on this man named Sir James Tyrrell. He was a knight that actually fought for the House of York, which reminds me a lot of this restaurant that we had back in Maryland. It was called Medieval Times. If you guys know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about. So, James Tyrrell, he was arrested by King Henry VII's forces in 1502, and he was accused of supporting another man to try to get to the throne, which, I mean, you gotta love the men in power, right? It all goes through their heads sometimes. Shortly before his execution, it was said that he admitted to have murdering the princes. So he was like, yeah, I murdered the princes. Yeah, it was me. And he was told to do so by Richard III. When asked about it, he was unable to say where the bodies were and that the bodies had been moved by Richard himself. So he had no idea where they were. There was also a third suspect who was thought to be behind the disappearances, and this suspect's name was Henry Stafford, and he was the 2nd Duke of Buckingham. He was considered involved because the fact that he was actually the Uncle Richard's considered to be like a right-hand man, if you know what I mean. It's kind of like the vice president and everything. So it was said that the 2nd Duke had a lot of reasons for wanting the boys dead. The first reason was because he wanted to take the throne for himself. I mean, honestly, who wouldn't want to rule an entire kingdom back then? So he wanted that. He wanted to feel that power. He craved it. I mean, like, it's all he thought about. He wanted to be in power. So he felt like the young boys, they didn't deserve to be in power because they didn't know what they were doing. They were too young and too inexperienced, like I just talked about before, a lot of people thought. So it's said that he was just jealous of the boys. This was the second reason why, is that he was jealous of them. He didn't want the 2 boys on the line to get to the throne because he wanted it for himself. And this made him jealous that they were actually being considered as being king. So he felt so upset and really just took out a lot of anger on the boys. He treated them like dirt from what I researched. Henry Stafford was then said to have been executed back in November of 1483, and this was said to have been because there was a falling out between him and the king. However, it was said that he had no idea that the princes were even missing. Henry was said to have been really shocked. I'm using quotations because who's to know? And he said that he was shocked to find out that the princes were missing, and he didn't know anything about this. The Duke of Buckingham was the only person besides Richard III to be officially named a suspect in the case. However, despite all of this, there was a lot of people that believed that this was extremely unlikely, and he wouldn't have, it was extremely unlikely that he would have acted alone. So if he was behind the murders, he had to have someone there with him, right? So if he disobeyed Richard's orders, he would have just gotten in a lot of trouble. All the blame from the disappearances would have gone right onto the Duke, if you knew what I mean. So a lot of people assume that the Duke may have possibly murdered the princesses to end the bloodline so that he could become king as well. There's a whole bunch of issues. Everyone wants to be king at this point, apparently. During the reign of King Henry VII, there was two men who claimed to have been Richard, Duke of York, the Richard that went missing. So the first one was a man whose name was Lambert Simnel, and he arrived to the palace and stated that, hey, I'm Richard, I'm here to take the throne. So after a while of interviewing him to see, who he was and all that stuff, he ended up changing his story. He said that he wasn't Lambert and all this other stuff. His name is actually Edward Plantagenet, and he was actually the 17th Earl of Warwick. It just seems like this guy's got multiple personality disorder. I don't know. He wants to be the king, apparently. So the second of the two men was a man named Perkin Warbeck. These are some interesting names, guys. Who claimed that he was, in fact, King Richard IV, the young prince that went missing. However, Richard III's sister stepped forward. Her name was Margaret. And she was the boy's aunt, and she recognized him straight up as Perkin Warbeck. After Perkin failed to invade England, he was then captured by the king's forces, and it was said that he had lied about being Richard. Once he said that, he was rounded up and then executed for lying and then attempting to overthrow the kingdom by invasion. So there was an 18th century writer, his name was Horace Walpole. These are some interesting ass names in this one today, who stated that Richard had actually not been killed, like the Prince Richard, so the T. Horace then recanted that statement and said that they had both been murdered by Richard III, and this was so that he could get the crown. So another writer named Annette Carson, she stated that Richard had actually kidnapped both of the brothers and smuggled them to the Duchess of Burgundy's home. And this was so that he could get the crown. And they allowed them to be raised under these false names, so no one knew they were actually the princes, even though the princes knew they were the princes, So, none of this information about the whole, whether or not this was this person, whether or not they were raised over here, was never actually verified. Yeah. So, in 2021, there were a few devout researchers who claimed to have found very important evidence regarding this case as to what could have happened to the princes. These researchers believe that Edward, who was the missing prince, had actually survived and was said to have grown up living in a place called the Devon village of Coleridge. So these researchers also ended up linking Prince Edward to a man whose name was John Evans, and he lived in the Devon village back in the year of 1484, and he was given the title of Lord of the Manor. I want to be queen of my manor. So not a lot of people know not a lot of people know about him. There's not a lot known to the public about who this guy was, other than the fact that they believed he may have been Edward, living under a different name and assumed identity, growing up somewhere else. So most people, however, they truly believe that the young princes had in fact actually been murdered, and the person to blame for the murders was the Uncle Richard. He either killed them directly or had someone else go and search them down, possibly kidnap them, and then kill them. So that's just what a lot of people believe happened. So, however, it's also said that he wanted his flesh and blood Richard, the Prince Richard, to rule over Edward instead of Edward. So it's possible that he just wanted one killed, and then both of them ended up being killed. Who knows? So it's more possible that Richard killed both of the boys himself because he wanted to be king. But it's said that it is believed that Richard killed his nephews, and he was now because of the fact that he was they was said that he had killed his nephews, he was now unable to sit on the throne. So if he had in fact killed his nephews so he could sit on the throne, honey, that didn't work. So it's ridiculous. So he was then sent to be subsequently exiled, and yes, he ended up dying and away from the palace and away from his family. He was exiled. So no one to this day knows exactly what happened to the young princes, whether or not the bodies that were found in the palace were said to belong to them. Nobody knows for sure, and the case has never been solved about what could have possibly happened to them. So, as always, I would love to know what your thoughts and opinions are on this case. Do you guys think the boys were killed by their Uncle Richard so they wouldn't take the throne? Or do you think there was another possible outcome as to what could have happened to them? Do you think maybe they got lost? Maybe they fell down, broke necks, went missing? What do you guys think happened? And something that really freaks me out is the princes went missing. But how come the parents, the king and the queen, how did they not know that they were gone? It blows my mind. So, what do you guys think happened to them? What do you think the outcome was? I mean, obviously they're dead now, but what do you think? Do you think they were murdered by their uncle? Do you guys think something else happens? What do you guys think? Let me know down below in the comments section. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so that you never miss any of my videos. Hit that notification bell so it will alert you whenever I upload. And don't forget to, don't forget to comment down below any case suggestions you might have for me today. And that's it for you guys. Remember, I post on Tuesdays and Fridays, with my vintage cases being on Fridays. So I'll see you guys in my next video. I'm so excited for this one. This one has me my mind is blown. I don't understand what possibly could have happened. So I'll see you guys in my next one. Bye, guys.